Usually if an athlete has their professional career cut short, it's because of some injury they suffered while playing. But in today's topic, a medical condition prevented this player from having their professional career even get started. Welcome back everybody. For those new, my name's Brian and I'm a doctor and a sports fan, and it's my goal to help explain different sports injuries and sports medicine topics to you all in a way that's easier to learn from and understand. Today I'm going to be telling you all about why the NBA wouldn't let Isaiah Austin play because of something called Marfan Syndrome that he was diagnosed with just before the NBA draft. As always, if you like watching these videos and want to see more, go hit that subscribe button so that you can always stay up to date whenever I release new content, and let's get started. You might remember the story where Isaiah Austin was a big-time prospect coming out of college and was projected to go pretty high in the NBA draft. As part of their pre-draft screening, the players have to undergo a physical exam where the doctors discovered an abnormality that ultimately led to further workup and then the diagnosis of something called Marfan Syndrome. Based on this diagnosis, they deemed that it was too risky for him to play and he wasn't allowed to play in the NBA. So what we'll do today is I'm going to help you understand what Marfan Syndrome is and why it caused Austin to not be able to play professional basketball in the NBA. Let's start off with understanding some basics of genetics. Whenever someone goes and builds a house or makes some sort of meal with a recipe, those blueprints or that recipe is sort of the key to how you construct the house or how you make the meal. It contains the specific steps and information needed to end up with a good and finished product. Similarly, every single cell in our body has DNA that's composed of these different molecules that lay out the blueprint for how our cells are going to be constructed and how our body's going to be formed and function. Everything is extremely fine-tuned, and so if we ever have abnormalities in those genes, we can end up with bad outcomes because things don't work right in our body. Specifically in Marfan Syndrome, it's an abnormality of something called fibrillin, and fibrillin is a major component of the different elastic tissues that we have throughout our body. Some of the main elastic tissues to think about that contain fibrillin would be things like the skin, our ligaments in our joints, the eyes, and even parts of our blood vessels. And essentially all of those tissues need to have elastic stretching properties. So if you have an abnormality in fibrillin because of Marfan Syndrome, then you have abnormality in the function of these different elastic tissues. Something you'll read about if you search for Marfan Syndrome is the general appearance of people who have this condition. And they're very tall, slender, with very long arms, skinny, long fingers. And so whenever we heard this about Isaiah Austin, we could look at his body type and say, yeah, this does make sense. He has what we would call a Marfanoid body habitus. But don't worry, everybody who has big, long, skinny fingers and is tall and thin doesn't have Marfan Syndrome, but there is sort of a distinct physical pattern that we can recognize. People with Marfan Syndrome have effects all throughout their body, but the key one that we need to focus on with Austin is how it can affect the blood vessel and the heart. Whenever doctors aren't letting someone play in the NBA, it's typically because of things that could be deadly. As I mentioned earlier, we find these elastic fibers in the blood vessels. Looking at our basic heart anatomy here, we have the different chambers of the heart and then the big aorta that comes off of the heart and delivers oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. And this is a big, thick blood vessel. It really is almost the size of a garden hose. There's an abundant amount of this elastic tissue right at the base of the aorta, or what we would call the ascending aorta. Thinking about the heart squeezing and pumping every time it pumps blood, it's going to stretch that aorta a little bit, and so it needs to be nice and elastic. It needs to be able to expand and then come back, expand and come back, beat after beat. With Marfan Syndrome, you don't have that same elastic properties, and so you can get dilation or kind of bulging out of that ascending part of the aorta, and we would call that aortic root dilation. Now that in and of itself isn't particularly harmful, but what it can lead to could be potentially deadly. A dilated aortic root can cause an aortic dissection. A dissection is whenever the lining of the blood vessel wall actually gets torn and the blood vessel can rupture. Obviously that's really bad and can be deadly if the main blood vessel coming off the heart were to rupture. So that's the concern when these people have this condition with Marfan's. What makes it even worse is whenever you go exert yourself and do physical activity, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, and so you're subjecting that blood vessel to even higher amounts of stress and load that make you more susceptible to it being damaged or rupturing. This is why doctors don't want athletes to be playing sports when they have Marfan Syndrome if they have that dilation of the blood vessel. Whenever someone has Marfan Syndrome with this defect in the aorta, doctors will do something called echocardiograms, which is an ultrasound of the heart, to measure how expanded and how dilated that is. The great thing is people with Marfan Syndrome typically can have normal life expectancies if you manage everything properly. You can take medicines to manage the heart rate and the blood pressure, and you do serial monitoring to make sure that you're not developing any dissection or any enlarging of that blood vessel. We don't know exactly what his blood vessel looked like whenever they told him he couldn't play, but there has to have been enough there that the doctor said this is just too high risk and could potentially be deadly if something were to happen on the court. Oftentimes, if they do enough monitoring and they've shown enough stability in the size of that blood vessel, then there's less risk and the doctors will be more willing to let someone play. And I believe Austin's even playing basketball overseas right now professionally. So I don't know what the rules of those leagues are compared to the NBA, but certainly the doctors that would have cleared him over there don't feel as concerned based on how his body is at that time. Now, could he ever come back and play in the NBA? That depends entirely on what the doctors find and how comfortable they feel with letting him get out there on the court. It's not unexpected that the doctors wouldn't have known ahead of time when he was in college that he had this condition. Some of the first symptoms can be abnormal heartbeats or abnormal heart palpitations or chest pain, getting short of breath when you work out, but oftentimes it's just kind of incidentally found based on other factors that the doctors see. In this case, during that physical, they might have found some sort of heart murmur or found some sort of abnormal electrical activity on a heart rhythm test, and that's what prompted them to check out more things to see what was going on. So to sum it up here for you guys, Isaiah Austin couldn't play because of Marfan Syndrome and how it can affect the blood vessels around the heart. Marfan Syndrome is a genetic condition that causes abnormal formation of elastic tissues in our body, and in particular can affect the elastic tissue in the aorta coming off of the heart. The aorta can dilate and grow over time because of not having that elastic property, and ultimately can lead to a dissection, which is where the blood vessel can get a tear. That of course can be deadly, and the more you exert yourself and the more active you are without proper medications, the more at risk you are of that happening. I'd question whether or not he can get back to the NBA someday, but depending on how his health progresses, it could be a possibility. That's it, everybody. Thanks as always for watching these videos. Let me know any comments you have below or topics you want to see me talk about in the future. And until next time, thanks for watching and we'll see y'all later. Bye.